I always knew I was meant for something bigger. While others talked about stability and real jobs, I dreamed of a name, my name, etched into the world of luxury fashion. I could see it so clearly. Elegant boutiques, my designs on the most influential people, a brand that whispered sophistication and power. This wasn't some fleeting fantasy. It was my future. And with every sketch, every plan, every late-night idea scribbled in a worn-out notebook, I got closer to making it real. So, when I sat down with my parents, heart pounding, hands clasped together with nervous excitement, I thought, just for a second, they would see what I saw. That they would smile, maybe ask questions, show some kind of belief in me. But the moment the words left my mouth, the room grew colder. My father leaned back in his chair, letting out a low chuckle, the kind that wasn't amused. It was cruel. My mother? She just shook her head, lips twisting into something between pity and disappointment. A fashion empire? You? My father scoffed, his voice dripping with disbelief. You can't even run your own life, let alone a business. The words hit like a slap, but he wasn't done. You're too naive, too inexperienced, too stupid to succeed. My mother nodded, as if it was some undeniable fact. No daughter of ours will ever run a successful business. They didn't just doubt me. They found the idea of me succeeding laughable. They didn't even consider that I might prove them wrong. I sat there feeling the sting of every word, every insult, every attempt to shrink me into someone small, someone forgettable. And yet beneath the humiliation, something stronger took root. A quiet, unwavering certainty. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg them to believe in me. No, I was going to win. I would make them eat every single word. I left that conversation with a fire burning inside me. Not the kind that fades overnight, the kind that turns into something unstoppable. They thought they had shut me down, that their laughter, their cruel words, had sealed my fate. But what they didn't realize was that they had done the opposite. They had given me the exact fuel I needed. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, their voices echoed in my head. Too naive, too inexperienced, too stupid, over and over. Each repetition dug deeper, but instead of breaking me, it solidified something inside me. I wasn't going to prove them wrong just for revenge. No, I was going to do it because I knew I could, because I refused to let their lack of belief define my worth. The next morning, I woke up with a decision. No more waiting for approval, no more hoping they would see my potential. I saw it. That was enough. If they wanted me to get a real job, fine, I'd work, but not to abandon my dream. I would do whatever it took to fund it, to learn everything I needed to know. I'd teach myself, build something from the ground up, and when the day came that my name meant something, they would have no choice but to watch. I grabbed my notebook, the same one I had used for years, and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, in bold letters, I wrote 4 words. I'll prove them wrong. It wasn't just a promise anymore. It was a blueprint for everything I was about to do. From that moment on, I refused to waste another second seeking validation. I stopped waiting for encouragement, stopped hoping for an ounce of belief from people who had already decided I was destined to fail. If they couldn't see it, fine. I would build it anyway. I started obsessing, not in a reckless way, but in a way that turned every waking moment into preparation. I studied fashion, not just the aesthetics, but the industry itself. I read everything I could about business, marketing, branding. I watched interviews with designers, took online courses, analyzed what made a brand powerful. If knowledge was power, I was determined to arm myself to the teeth. But learning wasn't enough. I needed money. So I worked. Hard. Early mornings, late nights, multiple jobs, anything that would bring me closer to funding my dream. I folded clothes in retail stores, took shifts at a cafe, even worked as an assistant at a tiny design studio, just to be near the world I wanted to conquer. It was exhausting, sure, but every dollar earned felt like a brick in the empire I was building. And through it all, my parents never asked, never checked in, never cared. To them, I was still chasing a ridiculous fantasy, wasting time. They had no idea that every late shift, every sleepless night, every sacrifice was bringing me one step closer. Closer to the moment they would see my name, not as a joke, but as a force. Building something from nothing isn't glamorous. It's not a perfect montage set to inspirational music. It's exhaustion, self-doubt, and an uphill battle every single day. But I had already made my choice. There was no turning back. If my parents thought I'd give up the second things got hard, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The first real challenge? Money. No investors, no savings, no safety net. Every cent I made went straight into fabric, equipment, and branding. I started small, really small. Sewing at night in my cramped apartment, sketching designs between shifts, researching suppliers on my lunch breaks. I had no storefront, no team, just me, a few rolls of fabric, and an unshakable belief that this would work. Then came the doubt. Not mine, but from everyone around me. Friends asked if I was sure about this. Coworkers raised eyebrows when I said I was working on a brand. Some laughed, some nodded politely, but I could see it in their eyes. They didn't think I would make it either. And that's when I realized something. People don't believe in things they can't see. And since my success didn't exist yet, they had already written me off. But that only made me hungrier. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't waiting for a perfect moment. I was making this happen. One stitch, one design, one sale at a time. I launched my first boutique in the tiniest space imaginable. Barely more than a studio with a clothing rack and a cheap sign out front. No grand opening, no press, no excited customers lining up at the door. Just me, standing behind a counter, waiting, hoping. And at first, nothing. Days passed with barely a handful of visitors. Some walked in, glanced around, and left without a word. Others smiled sympathetically, as if they could already see me failing. It was humiliating. I had sacrificed everything to get to this moment, and the world just didn't care. But I refused to let that be the end of the story. If no one was paying attention, I'd make them. I started reaching out to fashion bloggers, sliding into their DMs, offering them free pieces if they'd just wear my designs once. I studied marketing like my life depended on it, because honestly, it did. I posted relentlessly, learned photography tricks to make my work look high-end, and hustled harder than I ever had before. Then, the real war began, the competition. Established brands didn't see me as a threat at first, but as soon as I started gaining traction, they did. And they fought back. Bigger stores undercut my prices. Suppliers started pulling deals, suddenly unable to work with a business of my size. Some even spread rumors that my designs weren't original. It was brutal, and for a moment I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not strong enough to win this fight. But then I remembered. They didn't believe in me either. My parents, my doubters, the entire industry, they had all written me off before I had even started. And yet, here I was. Maybe struggling, maybe exhausted, but still standing. I kept pushing. Every setback, every obstacle, every whispered doubt, I used it as fuel. If suppliers dropped me, I found new ones. If competitors tried to undercut me, I made my designs so good that people would pay the extra price. If the industry wanted to ignore me, I would make myself unignorable. Then, one day, it happened. A local influencer, one with actual reach, posted a photo wearing one of my designs. My design. She didn't tag me, didn't credit my brand, but it didn't matter. People noticed. They started asking, commenting, sharing. I woke up the next morning to more orders than I had ever seen. My website, which had been barely scraping by, was suddenly buzzing with traffic. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was growing. But growth brought new battles. Suddenly, people who had ignored me wanted a piece of what I had built. Suppliers who once refused to work with me came crawling back. Investors started calling, acting as if they had believed in me all along. It was tempting, so tempting, to take the easy route, to finally breathe. But I wasn't about to let someone else own what I had bled for. So I made a choice. I would expand, but on my terms. No shortcuts, no compromises. This wasn't just a brand anymore. It was proof. Proof that I was more than capable. Proof that every person who doubted me had been dead wrong. Success doesn't happen overnight, but when the moment finally arrives, it feels like it does. One day, I was barely making ends meet, fighting for scraps of attention. The next, my brand was everywhere. My inbox flooded with inquiries. Stores wanted to carry my designs. Stylists, the same ones who once ignored my messages, suddenly needed my pieces for their clients. It was surreal. I had spent so long clawing my way up, I barely recognized what winning felt like. But make no mistake, this wasn't luck. This was strategy. Every move, every risk, every late night had led to this. And now, for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was leading. Expansion was inevitable. I opened more stores, first in my city, then beyond. Fashion magazines started featuring my work, calling me the rising star of luxury fashion. Celebrities, influencers, even royalty, they wanted me. My designs were walking red carpets, gracing covers, selling out in minutes. And just like that, the same world that once ignored me was now hanging onto my every move. But the biggest shock? My parents. They had spent years laughing at my ambition, dismissing my dreams, making me feel like I was nothing. Now they were watching their daughter become a household name, and suddenly, everything changed. The first time I saw my parents react to my success, it wasn't through a phone call or a heartfelt message. No, it was through a news article, a feature about me, in one of the biggest fashion magazines in the country. My face on the page, my name headlining the article. A journalist calling me a visionary, a powerhouse, a force in luxury fashion. I imagined them reading it, sitting in the same house where they had once mocked me. I wondered if they hesitated before flipping the page, if they felt even a fraction of the disbelief I had once felt when they told me I was destined to fail. If, for the first time, they realized how wrong they had been. But they didn't reach out. Not at first. Instead, I started hearing things through other people, old neighbors, distant relatives, acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years. Suddenly, my parents were proud. They told everyone how brilliant I was, how they had always known I would be successful, how I had inherited their work ethic and proved that ambition runs in the family. I laughed when I heard that one. They weren't proud of me. They were proud of the story they could tell about me. They were rewriting history in their favor, pretending they had always been supportive, that they had somehow played a role in my success. But I hadn't forgotten. I remembered everything. And soon enough, they would reach out themselves. The call came late one evening. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to pick up. Gina, my mother's voice crackled through the line, hesitant, unfamiliar. It had been years since I'd last heard it, yet there was no warmth, no apology, just a forced casualness, as if nothing had ever happened. We've been meaning to call. We're so proud of you. I let the silence stretch between us. Proud. A word they had never used when I needed to hear it the most. We always knew you had it in you, she continued, her tone a little too rehearsed, a little too careful. Then, just as I expected, she got to the real reason behind the call. Your father and I, we're going through a bit of a rough time. There it was. The shift, the subtle transition from praise to need. After years of dismissal, mockery, and outright rejection, they weren't just reaching out to acknowledge my success. They wanted something. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping against the sleek glass desk that I had earned in the empire I had built, the very empire they said would never exist. Funny, I said, my voice calm but sharp. You didn't think I was capable of running a business, but now you're calling me for help. Silence. For the first time, they had nothing to say. There was a time when I would have done anything to hear those words. We're proud of you. Back then, I craved their approval like air, desperate for even the smallest sign that they believed in me. But now their words felt empty, manufactured. Just another carefully chosen move in a game they thought they could still control. We did everything for you, my mother said, her voice slipping into that well-worn tone of parental martyrdom. We just wanted what was best. And look at you now. You proved us right. I almost laughed. Proved them right? That was rich. I let the silence stretch, waiting, watching how quickly the cracks in their performance would show. It didn't take long. My father cleared his throat. "Listen, Gina," he said, his voice suddenly gruffer, more urgent. "We're in a bit of a situation. Nothing serious, just we could use a little help. Financially." Ah, there it was. I leaned back, glancing at the city skyline outside my penthouse window, the one I had earned without them, the one they never believed I could have. "So let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice measured. "You called, not to apologize, not to acknowledge how much you underestimated me, but to ask for money?" Silence. And then, the inevitable defense. "We're your family," my mother said, as if that was supposed to mean something after all these years. "And family helps each other." Family. That word used to mean something to me. It used to hold weight, used to be unshakable. But now, coming from them, it felt like a weapon, a card they only played when it suited them. "Family helps each other?" I repeated, my voice calm but cutting. "That's interesting because I don't remember you helping me when I needed it." "Gina, that's not fair," my father snapped, irritation creeping into his voice. There it was, the mask slipping. "We had to be realistic. We couldn't let you waste your life chasing some fantasy." I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. A fantasy. That's what they called it back then. That's what they mocked, belittled, dismissed as a childish delusion. And now? Now that fantasy had become something they needed. My mother sighed, her voice softening, shifting into something that might have fooled me once. "Sweetheart, we were wrong. We see that now. But we're struggling, and you have the means to help. Don't you think it's time to move past all this? We're still your parents. Still my parents." As if that erased years of humiliation. As if that alone made them deserving of the success they had no part in building. I glanced at the designer sketches sprawled across my desk. The empire I had created. The future that I had fought for. And for the first time, I realized something. I didn't owe them a damn thing. I let the silence stretch, letting them sit in the weight of their own words. In the past, I might have wavered, might have softened at the sound of their voices. But not anymore. I owed them nothing. "You're right," I said finally, my tone unreadable. "You're still my parents." I paused, just long enough for them to believe they had won. But that doesn't mean you get to rewrite history. A sharp inhale from my mother. My father started to say something, but I cut him off. "You didn't believe in me. You didn't support me. You mocked me, humiliated me, told me I was stupid for even trying." My voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it. "And now that I've made it, on my own, you think you deserve a share of what I built?" "Gina," my mother tried again, softer now, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "That's not fair." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "Fair?" I repeated. Fair was all I ever wanted. But life wasn't fair to me. You weren't fair to me. I leaned back, staring out at the city below, my empire stretching far beyond anything they had ever imagined for me. So now, I get to decide what's fair. More silence. And for the first time, I think they understood. They weren't speaking to the same girl they once belittled. They were speaking to a woman who had survived them. I agreed to meet them, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted them to see, really see, what I had become. Not through a magazine article or a news segment. No, I wanted them to sit in my world, surrounded by the very success they once called impossible. So I invited them to my penthouse. My space. My rules. The moment they stepped inside, I saw it. The wide eyes, the subtle hesitation, the way my mother's fingers trailed over the marble countertops as if trying to convince herself this was real. My father stood stiff, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the skyline view like he was struggling to process it. I let them take it all in before I spoke. Have a seat, I said, gesturing toward the sleek, custom-made furniture they had absolutely no part in providing. They sat, shifting uncomfortably, waiting for me to break the tension. But I wasn't in a hurry. I wanted them to feel the weight of the moment. So, I finally said, crossing my legs, voice calm, "You need my help." My father cleared his throat, trying to regain some sense of authority. "We wouldn't ask if we weren't in a tough spot," he admitted, avoiding my gaze. "We just thought—" I tilted my head. "No, you didn't think. That was always the problem." My mother exhaled, pressing her hands together. "Gina, please. We know we made mistakes, but we're still family." There it was again. That word, family. As if saying it over and over would erase the past. I studied them for a long moment, letting their own discomfort settle in. They had expected something different, a warm reunion maybe, or at least an easy path to my generosity. They were wrong. "You know what's funny?" I said, my voice light, almost amused. "I spent years wishing you'd say those words, that you were proud of me, that you believed in me." I leaned forward, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. "But now that you finally have, they don't mean a damn thing." My mother flinched, her face tightening. "That's not fair, Gina." I laughed, shaking my head. "Fair. They loved that word when it suited them." "You didn't think about fairness when you called me stupid for chasing this dream." "You didn't think about fairness when you laughed in my face." I met my father's gaze, holding it steady. "You didn't believe in me until the world told you that you should." He had nothing to say to that. None of them did. "So, let's be clear," I continued, straightening in my chair. "I don't owe you anything. You don't get to waltz in here and play the loving parents just because it's convenient." A heavy silence filled the space. I could feel their unease, the way my words stripped away whatever delusion they had been clinging to. Good. Let them sit in it. Then, just as their shoulders started to slump, I dropped the final blow. "But," I said, tilting my head, "I am going to help you." Their eyes snapped up, startled. My mother's lips parted in relief. My father exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming next. Relief washed over their faces so quickly it was almost laughable. My mother reached for my hand, but I didn't move. My father sat a little straighter, clearing his throat like he was already trying to reclaim control of the situation. I let them have that moment. Let them believe just for a second that they had manipulated their way back into my life. Then I spoke. "I'll help you," I said, my tone even, deliberate. "But there are conditions." Their smiles faltered. They weren't expecting conditions. "You said family helps each other, right?" I leaned back, crossing my legs. "Well, I want to help you the way you helped me." Confusion flickered across their faces. My father frowned. "What do you mean?" I tilted my head. "I mean, I'll offer you the same support you offered me when I needed it." A slow, satisfied smirk pulled at my lips. "Which is none." My mother inhaled sharply. "Gina, that's—" "What? Unfair?" I cut in smoothly. "A bad business decision? Unrealistic? Because those were all the things you told me when I asked for help." I shrugged. "I'm just following the example you set." My father's jaw clenched. My mother's face paled. For the first time, they looked truly afraid, not of losing my money, but of finally facing the consequences of the way they had treated me. "I built this empire without you," I continued. "I bled for it, sacrificed for it, fought for it. And the only time you cared was when you realized it could benefit you." My voice dropped slightly, sharp as glass. "You don't deserve a single piece of it." I stood, smoothing out my dress, towering over them now, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. They had once belittled me. Now, they were nothing but desperate people sitting in a room they never believed I could own. "I think we're done here," I said, nodding toward the door. Their faces were blank, their bodies stiff with humiliation. My father opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. I watched as they stood, their movements slow, reluctant, as if they still couldn't believe this was happening. But it was. This was my revenge. Not anger, not cruelty, just a simple, undeniable truth. They needed me. I didn't need them. The door closed behind them with a quiet click, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not triumph, not some grand sense of revenge, just clarity. The weight of their expectations, their mockery, their doubt, it was all gone. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city that had once felt impossible to conquer. My city now, my empire, built with my hands, my sacrifices, my determination. Not theirs. Never theirs. For years, I had imagined this moment, fantasized about what I would say, how I would make them regret every cruel word, every insult. But now that it had happened, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like closure. A door I had been waiting to shut for far too long. I thought I would feel empty without them. That, deep down, I still wanted their approval, their love. But standing here now, watching the life I had built stretch out before me, I realized the truth. I never needed them. I only ever needed to believe in myself, and I had. I still did. The next morning, I woke up lighter. No anger, no bitterness, just a quiet, settled feeling, like I had finally taken back something that was always mine. I went about my day as usual, moving through meetings, reviewing designs, planning the next phase of expansion. If my parents thought they had left a dent in me, they were wrong. They were a closed chapter. But the world had other plans. By the afternoon, my phone buzzed with messages, articles, interviews, posts. Word had spread. People weren't just talking about my success anymore. They were talking about them. How they had dismissed me, humiliated me, only to come crawling back when they needed something. The internet had dug up my past, piecing together the story even though I had never once spoken about it publicly. The headlines were brutal. Luxury fashion mogul shuts down parents who once laughed at her dream. She built an empire. Now her parents want a piece. Success is the best revenge. Gina Thompson's unapologetic rise. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't needed the world to know. But somehow they did. I exhaled slowly, setting my phone down. The old me would have felt guilty, would have worried about how my parents must have felt seeing their own failure exposed like this. But now, I didn't owe them protection any more than I owed them success. They had written me off. The world had written me in. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city pulse below me. The irony wasn't lost on me. How the same world that had once ignored me now hung onto my every move. The story had taken on a life of its own, sparking debates, think pieces, and endless speculation. Some people called me ruthless. Others called me an inspiration. I didn't care either way. For years, I had let other people's opinions shape me. Their doubts, their judgments, their limitations, I had carried them like weights around my ankles. But not anymore. I had won. Not just in business, not just in proving my parents wrong, but in the only way that truly mattered. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. My assistant poked her head in, an amused smile on her lips. "You have a reporter downstairs," she said. "Wants to do a last-minute feature on you. Apparently, you're the businesswoman of the decade now." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Let them wait," I said, standing up and grabbing my coat. "I have somewhere more important to be." I wasn't running from my success. I wasn't hiding from the headlines. But today, for the first time in years, I wanted to celebrate for myself. No press, no audience. Just me, a glass of wine, and the life I had built with my own two hands. As I stepped out onto the street, a voice called my name. A reporter, breathless, microphone in hand. "Gina, a quick question. What do you say to all the people who doubted you?" I smiled, slipping on my sunglasses. "Thank you." And then I walked away, leaving the past exactly where it belonged.